All right, Brian Ross, welcome to our podcast. Brian is with InfraShares, a public infrastructure investment platform, crowdfunding platform that we want to learn from on our tech podcast. So, Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get here? How did you end up in this business? And what is the industry like for public infrastructure crowdfunding?
Yeah. So my background is in construction management, civil engineering, project finance. I worked for years as a project manager on big, heavy civil infrastructure projects, big transit projects, water, wastewater projects, big road projects. And then I did an MBA and got really interested in the funding and finance of those projects. So I kind of started to steer my career away from the project management to the project development side. Worked for a time with a small private equity fund, worked for a municipal finance advisor, worked for P3 public-private partnership advisory firm. And then while I was doing that advisory work, working with public sector sponsors of big projects on figuring out how to fund or finance big projects, I had a couple of peers who were working on this idea of crowdfunded finance, crowdfunded investment, and they were working on a platform focused on raising capital for commercial real estate through this idea of crowdfunding. And so, if you're probably familiar with sites like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, where people can contribute donations towards startups or projects or products that they want to support. But up until a couple of years ago, companies couldn't raise investment through that model. It was donations only. But then in 2016, legislation was passed that allowed for companies to raise capital by offering securities through online platforms. And it was called regulation crowdfunding. And so that opened the door for this idea of investment crowdfunding, allowing startups to issue equity, issue debt. And really what the legislative intent was to make it easier for startups to raise capital. And so that model was adopted really quickly in the tech space. There's a couple of big platforms that help tech startups raise capital, but they're kind of generalist platforms. There's a couple of platforms that are focused on commercial real estate. And so my light bulb moment was, let's take that model and apply it to public infrastructure. You've got a need for investment at the project level, both seed stage capital, development stage capital, all the way up to getting the community invested in big, high profile transportation and transit projects. And on the investor side, you've got investors who don't really have access to infrastructure as an asset class. And so we saw a huge need and huge opportunity to kind of connect this idea of raising capital from the crowd with public infrastructure development. And so my co-founder and I, Morteza Faragian, started the process of looking into this. We wrote a paper for the Transportation Research Board. It got a lot of positive feedback. And so we started down the process of building out the platform, actually making a business out of it. So now we went through the process of getting all the regulatory approvals in place. We built out the technology, we built out the legal framework, the marketing, the advertising. We've got the platform all built out, and now we're starting to work with project sponsors to bring offerings to the platform. And in addition to raising capital for projects, we also work with startups in the space. So if you're a startup that has an innovative technology around using drones to inspect bridges and overpasses, or you've got some interesting technology related to how to utilize data collection on public infrastructure, we think that those really go well together. With the idea of helping to innovate in the infrastructure space, which is
needs innovation.
Needs innovation, needs capital, needs innovation, needs spark, and so we really think that connecting the crowd, connecting a broad base of individual investors with experience in the space and interest in infrastructure projects that can benefit them from a personal standpoint as well. So if you're an investor coming to InfraShares, you're going to look at projects and see offerings that can generate a financial return, but also if it's a project in the community you live in, it's going to help your water quality or help your commute or help your access to broadband. So we think there's a strong financial return plus social return aspect from the investor side.
You're a social entrepreneur.
Yeah. I mean, it's a combination of fintech and impact investing and social entrepreneurship and infratech, which is, you've probably heard of construction tech, contech. We're trying to open up the infratech space.
Infrastructure technology.
Yep.
And bringing it, kind of bridging these divides. The innovation with public infrastructure don't always go together. Public infrastructure is a very, very old, tried and tested through business, and there hasn't been maybe a giant leap forward in this industry for a long time. Right. So you started this a few years ago.
Yeah. So Mortez and I wrote the research paper back in 2016, and then we did some market sounding in the space and got a lot of positive feedback. So in 2018, we started building out the platform. In 2019, we went through the process of getting SEC and FINRA approval to run Reg CF offerings. And then since late 2019, we've really been working hard to build the pipeline of offerings and bring investors to the platform as well.
Okay. So was this all privately funded, or did you have?
Mostly primarily bootstrap, but we do have a couple of angel investors. But as of yet, no institutional investment or VC funding, primarily because we really believe in the idea of crowdfunding as a viable alternative to the institutional investors that are out there. And so we're really trying to build the platform organically.
Sure. So take us through kind of a typical process. If a project comes up, and if you want to take us through our website, that'd be even great.
Yeah, let me share my screen real quick.
I've been to your website. I've seen some projects listed. Some say completed, some are pending. So
yeah. So when you come to InfraShares, you'll see some, our splash page with some general information about our vision and our method and our team. And then if you click on invest, then you'll actually be taken to kind of the marketplace of infrastructure investments.
Wow.
And so you'll see tombstones for each of the offerings that are live now, and you can kind of you can scroll through. You can see some of the past offerings that we've done, and so and then you can filter by: are you interested in water? Are you interested in transportation? Are you interested in social infrastructure, renewable energy, etc.? And then if you find something that kind of piques your interest, you click on the offering, and you'll be presented with kind of the summary pitch deck of the offering, usually some kind of intro video. You can scroll through, see information on the offering, and then if you have questions, so there's typically an associated video, and then you have your data room, kind of like for a traditional offering where you can review some of the more detailed aspects of the disclosure documents. But then one of the really interesting things about Reg CF offerings is that the issuers are required to have a question and answer platform. So as an investor reads through all the documentation, if they have a question, they can post it here, and the issuer comes in and provides a response. And so any other issuer that comes to the offering and is interested can review the questions and answers that have already been posted. And so it's a way of crowdsourcing due diligence around the offering.
So people that want to invest they don't have underwriters. I think I saw a question about if you're accredited or not accredited when you want to sign up. So how does that work?
So the beauty of our platform is we operate under the regulation crowdfunding, which allows for anyone to invest. You do not have to be accredited. You do not have to be an institutional investor. This is open to everyone. Everyone can invest, and we make the investment thresholds as small as possible. So this offering right here, the minimum investment is $500. So it's a big changed from the days where you had to be accredited and you likely had to write a minimum check of $25,000 to
And what
get
kind
in.
of return is promised on a $500 investment?
I mean, it varies. It varies from offering to offering, and I don't want to go into any. I actually prohibited from going into specific details of the offerings, but if investors are interested, they come check it out. But I guess the point is, we have offerings that span the risk return profile from early seed stage, more speculative equity investments, all the way to investing in operating assets that are offering a debt investment, with more structured.
But these are, public infrastructure, right? These are, so it's backed by a public agency that may or assumably be highly rated. So it's a little safer than just your ordinary run-of-the-mill private investment. Is it, or am I misreading?
Well, primarily the projects that we're going to have offerings for are public-private partnerships. So that means it's a private company working to develop a project, usually in cooperation with a public agency. Okay. So the public agency isn't necessarily backing the investment, but there's some arrangement between the private developer and the public agency to execute on a project. And so again, that varies from offering to offering, but generally speaking, these are infrastructure assets that have a risk return profile that's less risky than commercial real estate, but more risky than muni bonds, and so the returns are also in that range, and that's kind of the niche asset class that we're trying to corner for investors and give them access to these types of investments that right now really aren't out there. Right. But yeah, typically there's some partnership with a public agency.
Right. So it's partnership. Just let me dig into that a little bit more so I can understand. Is it, let's say, the public agency ground lease the land for long term, or do they go in with money or partially funded? Generally, what does that public-private partnership look like generally?
Yeah, generally it looks like the public agency wants to build a new waste. For example, a public agency wants to build a new wastewater treatment plant. They have some funding that can go into it, but they don't have the entire amount. So they enter into some kind of long-term design, build, finance, operate, maintain agreement whereby the private developer comes in, puts up the rest of the capital to build, finish design, build the wastewater treatment plant, operate it, maintain it. And for a period of, let's say, 20 to 30 years, and during the course of that arrangement, the private developer is able to charge fees to the users, or there's some kind of availability payment, lease payment back to the developer by the public agency. So it's a way for the public agency to accelerate projects that might not otherwise get done if they had to wait for tax revenues or federal grant funding.
Typical public financing may not do the trick, so they need to partner with a private developer to accelerate these developments, which predominantly, I mean, some of them I saw was a housing project, but most of them look like some form of public service, right?
Yep.
So how do agencies or is it companies, how do people find you? How do they come to you?
Yeah, so if you go to www.infrashares.com, all my contact information is there. You can look us up on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. But if you go to the site, that's where the bulk of the information is. You can do some more reading on, how the process works, the regulatory environment, my background, and then you can reach out to me and say I'm interested either in being an investor, or I have a project that I'm looking at raising capital for, and then we can.
Do professionals in this industry, being that it's so cutting edge and innovative, would they know about such a service? I mean, or are you presenting at conferences, or they would just have to find you, right?
Yeah. So what we're doing a lot now is, getting a lot of what we're doing right now is legitimizing the idea, frankly, in the space, which is very conservative. And so I think people have heard of the idea of crowdfunding, but have not, thought about it in connection with public infrastructure yet. So that's one of our big challenges right now, is going to conferences, talking with people in the space, explaining to them how it works, and really, building the idea, building this model from scratch.
Yeah. Well, historically, city treasurers and state treasurers and the financial management folks are incredibly conservative, right? They're very tight with the public coffers, as they should be. And so they need to kind of understand not only that this service is available, but that the regulatory process that you described earlier and how you got permission to even do this seems fairly rigorous. It's not, you didn't just start this over a weekend. Several years of due diligence and legal approvals went into
I mean, that was the primary effort originally, is building out the legal and regulatory framework, and then going through the approval process with the regulatory agencies. And so there is a high level of oversight and scrutiny by SEC and FINRA on every offering, every investor communication, every advertising. We are highly regulated. And so in that regard, there should be some sense of security on the public agencies' part, that this is not something that we're kind of creating independently. We are highly regulated.
It's the beginning of a wave. I mean, there might be other crowdfunding sources coming, but it's the beginning of a wave of bridging these two platforms over the next to come. So it seems like a few dozen projects. Are there more coming? What are you looking for, a criteria or a certain class of projects, or will you take any size project?
Well, I mean, we'll look at any size project, and frankly, that's one of the key benefits of our model, is that we are very, from a technology standpoint, we're set up to handle very small investments, a large number of investments, and can do very small projects. So if you have a $50,000 sidewalk project, we'll work with that. We're set up to do very small projects. And in terms of the type of project, anything that broadly falls under the umbrella of infrastructure, we'll look at. My background is in water, wastewater, transportation. And so anything that falls under that umbrella of infrastructure, social infrastructure, schools, libraries, courthouses, fire stations, workforce housing, it's infrastructure can be a pretty broad umbrella. Digital infrastructure, rural broadband. So pretty broad umbrella, but we don't want to get into commercial real estate. We don't want to get into cryptocurrencies and things like that.
Got it. And thanks for mentioning rural broadband. That's something, a pet peeve of mine. I'm involved with a lot of digital divide conversations, so that's definitely something that's coming up. And in fact, various regions are asking for billions of dollars from the federal government as part of the Recovery Act, because the administration has identified broadband as infrastructure, not your typical infrastructure, because most people think of it roads and bridges and airports, but the digital infrastructure is becoming more and more important. And this could be a platform to help cities where carriers can't go, or otherwise you just can't connect the last mile. Cities who want to bridge the digital divide can use this type of service to connect the dots, basically.
Yes, exactly. And connect the dots by getting the end users of that infrastructure engaged in the financing. So where it may not be, where the investment or the structure may not fit into the cookie cutter criteria of a pension fund or a insurance company, we allow some flexibility by the issuers and the opportunity to engage the community that the project's going to serve.
And that community engagement also creates some grassroots supporters for projects, right? And so now you're vested in that bridge or that building or whatever is going up, and you tend to want to speak up a little bit more as you didn't before.
Absolutely. You're now invested in the subway system that you're riding on, and if you see somebody spray painting graffiti you may be more incentivized to call security or say something or report it, because now you have a direct financial interest in that project.
So that's a different spin on my taxpayers' tax dollars pay your salary. My investment is paying for this public infrastructure, and that's something I think we haven't really quite seen before in this space. So this is really exciting. I really want to make sure that our viewers see what you're doing. I already am thinking about several different companies that I want to connect you guys with. I have some friends that work in the virtual project manager space, where they create virtual project management of public infrastructure. And obviously in the post-COVID world, that's a big industry. But the fact that you work with other startups or somehow partner with them to create value for communities is pretty amazing, that you're not just fixed on the silo of what you're doing, but you're looking for strategic partnerships that help advance innovation in public infrastructure.
Yeah, and along those lines, one of the primary use cases we think is, startups often want to demonstrate their technology through pilot projects with public agencies, but the public agencies, don't want to outlay the funds to do those pilot projects. But if they could prove the pilot project, then the public agency would be happy to, enter into some kind of contract. So we allow the startups to raise capital for pilot projects that can demonstrate their technology, and then allows for follow-on projects.
And I see a kind of a symbiotic relationship where one startup may be in with a city or a jurisdiction, but you're not, and you guys can work together and they can bring you in, or the other way around, you're in with the city and these other public infrastructure innovation startups need help. So you guys can just bring more and more innovation. That's how innovation works. It's a little easier to connect technology than, let's say, bureaucracies and, like you say, grants and politics. But innovation has a lot easier time working together for the good of a community than other platforms. I think. So this is fantastic. This is we're going to keep in touch. I'm going to make sure everyone knows about what you're doing. It's right up the alley of kind of why I wanted to bring this platform to the forefront. Brian Ross, thank you for your time. All of your contact info will be under the post, and we're going to keep in touch because this is an exciting conversation.
Great. Thank you so much.